Letter number 5, 2.0. You used to be so strong. Performing strength as an extreme sport, but really just another trauma coping strategy and survival mechanism. No, I wasn't strong. I was surviving. It's interesting the way the current me now relates to not only the full length of the past itself, but also to the process that took place from the point of the rupture until now. Not always, but quite often, it does feel like all of that did not actually happen to me. I have access to all of the data, yet it feels as if it did not happen to me. It feels like at some point I have literally and fully stepped out of that world, life, paradigm, timeline, frequency, vibrational resonance, whatever you may want to call it, and found myself someplace different. Not suddenly, not abruptly, quite the opposite, actually, very slowly and very, very painfully. As a matter of fact, so slowly, undetectable at first, only recently it became clear that I was actually someplace or some place else. Until I am presented with a real time live situation or human form activation of the previously established circuitry where the old me tries to remind the new me very loudly that it all did happen to me, and not only that, it still may have some say at times. The place I am at now still feels like void, even though I have been saying that to myself for the last 2 years. I think I was semi wrong about the label. The void itself is actually empty, feels empty not as a lack, but as a space, which means that I have actually only entered the void recently. I suppose before I was still stripping layers, removing patterns, preconceived notions, confirmation bias, stuff like that, falling further, eventually entering the void while still facing backwards, as in toward the original self, toward the life I used to live. I'm no longer falling, and I am no longer facing backwards either. Now it looks empty, it feels empty, not as a lack, but rather as space. For the first time in my life or lives, I find current version of myself standing in a place where I do not see anything concrete, anything tangible. I am alone with almost nothing, and I'm not bracing for impact, at least not as a baseline. For the first time, it feels as if I am solid enough within my own energy and gravitational field where I'm not terrified of not being strong enough to deal with and handle whatever life itself presents me with. For the first time in my life, the discrepancy between what I am perceiving through my own body and nervous system versus what I'm being told is happening is no longer stripping me of my power. It is no longer destabilizing me. It is no longer chaining me to old survival strategies, protective patterns, and coping mechanisms. It's not that all the patterns are magically gone. It's that I can see clearly now what I would normally do, and I can have a conversation with myself in real time within the container of the self-awareness lab that allows me to discern of how the old me feels affected by whatever is happening and why and how it would behave. It all unfolds clearly in my mind's eye, for lack of better words, or within a specific example of what has happened in the past, possibly over and over again. And most importantly, I now have the ability to choose to not engage in those behaviors. There were many times where I would watch myself through executing said behavior, even though the pattern itself was already observed. My then body and nervous system were still not safe enough to execute the pause. I still had to act it out. There are definitely times where when 1.0 me still seems to be strong enough to try to convince me that I do not have a choice, that I will not survive, that I do have to struggle, suffer, and grind and compromise and self abandon in order to actually survive. Yes, it does happen. As recently as a couple of weeks ago, now mid June 2026. But the recovery of, or perhaps better, the bounce back rate from this type of a collapse has been incredibly efficient compared to the prolonged states of collapse over the last 2+ years since the rupture itself threw me into the melting pot, if you will. It turns out that the perceived ambiguity of my experience and everyone else's experience itself was part of the wound, part of the trauma, part of the conditioning, part of the identity, part of the role, part of the old operating system. The ambiguity itself is not the problem. My relationship to it and what I have interpreted it to be is or was. The moment my reality collapsed, not because he left, but because of how he left, which is important because of the ambiguity of my experience and the version he is presenting me with, left every single nerve, every single cell of every nerve exposed in a way that's hard for me to describe. It happened in an instant, actually, like an enormous explosion that detonated the original structure into obliteration of particles sent to every direction from the point of origin, me, into space, then froze in mid motion and remained frozen until every said particle has been picked up and examined, labeled, organized, and filed, and subsequently dissolved into ashes. Even though I was not really fully able to identify it as such, regardless of having awareness of the explosion itself and awareness of all of the floating frozen particles, that me then in that present moment was thrown into such a level of basic survival mode. Emil and I used to joke about running a backup generator on life with essentials only, where every single strategy or mechanism that the previous identity would use to maintain a sense of self was instantly no longer available. At that time, I thought that that was the worst part of it all, the being shattered, frozen, and suspended shock, active shock. I was wrong. What came next was the worst, but we'll save those specifics for another day. This part is specifically about what the deepest, most buried nerve in the original operating system is, the underlying sense of ambiguity covered by the strength that pretended that no ambiguity exists. The difference between what I am receiving and perceiving from my reality and what I feel I am actually experiencing. Most specifically, the part where some people, especially those closest to me, are trying to convince me that what I feel I am actually experiencing is in fact incorrect. It is implied here that they themselves have no conscious awareness of doing this. Obviously, this is not malicious, simply an unobserved projection of trying to maintain their own sense of safety. In the past, I had to believe them. In the past, I believed I had to believe them, always, regardless. I believed they always had my best interest in mind, that they were doing it for me. I believed a certain level of self awareness in these people that simply is not there. My then self would doubt my perception so deeply that anything I felt, good or bad, would never be deemed valid by my own internal system. I myself have invalidated my experience before anyone else could invalidate it for me. I have developed a self completely disconnected from my own core GPS, endlessly performing strength, compensating, bridging, maneuvering around, fixing, holding, adjusting myself in a way to manage everything, solve everything, figure out everything, hold it all together somehow. At the time, also projecting, protecting myself, some passive aggressiveness, some level of gaslighting and manipulation in order to feel any sense of power, any sense of control over my own experience, majority of it completely unobserved. Until I couldn't. Suddenly, it was no longer available. Suddenly, just like that, boom, I could see it all, I could feel it all in my body, and I could not touch it. Some way, somehow, I got trapped in this cocoon and started composting into mush and goo. My old self, through the vehicle of my mind, constantly screaming suggestions, actions, solutions of how to proceed, how to deal with the pain, revenge, release, relief, how to be strong. The rest of the system completely paralyzed, frozen, suspended, and in lockdown. Writing letters was the only allowed external action. Nothing else was to be initiated by me. I could only engage with whatever was placed in front of me by life. Everything else off limits. I would text myself instead of texting him. I would scream in my kitchen, staring out of the window, yell at him, express my rage and anger and sorrow, only he wasn't there. Just the dogs, always present, always listening, always by my side. I picked up and examined everything, piece by piece. I realized hardly any of what I thought was me was actually me, and parts of me that I did not think were me actually were much closer to me than anything else, but really, there was no me left. There was an aching body, there was a shattered heart, there was a breath, and there were screaming thoughts. There was pain, agony, despair, hopelessness, powerlessness, and futility. There was self loathing, self criticism, and self judgment. There was abandonment, betrayal, completely shattered sense of self worth as a woman and as a human. For a moment, there was a complete disconnect from life itself. Nothing meant anything. Everything was empty, pointless, and futile. Life had no meaning. Again, I found myself begging life, universe, God to take me, to free me. Another rock bottom, only this one further down. And then a new definition of strength presented itself. Just breathe. Don't move. Just breathe. Here, alive. Again and again. Shreds of awareness appeared within all that. Quiet. There. Watching. The system burned itself to the ground. The pain burned itself. The thoughts burned themselves until seemingly nothing remained. Just emptiness, sun, clouds, trees, birds, breeze, butterflies, dragonflies, cat, dogs, and cars, food, music, and a mouth, and me in the void, empty, clean. Everything else gone. Him, family, relationships, jobs, friends, most of them anyway, empty. In May 2026, I still stood by the emptiness facing backwards. Some strings still in place, keeping me facing that way. Nervous system still unable to face the unknown, still not safe enough to turn the other direction. Doubts loud and convincing enough. Fear, terror right at the surface. How will I survive? The fact that somehow I feel like I have to survive in the first place, its own trauma. Still bracing for impact, still rehearsing catastrophes, feeling guilty for actually having a good day here and there, feeling like I have not suffered enough, like I have not worked enough, like I am not strong enough. Somewhere around there, a close friend and I are discussing my state of affairs as she asks, "Do you expect it to just fall into your lap?" Every single part of my old circuitry immediately firing. I sit there and I watch the internal freak out. While I breathe myself into the body, it's like snuggling or tucking myself into my own physical mass and density. I want to start defending myself, explain better. How can she not understand at this point? How can she even ask me such question? Have haven't I explained enough? Has she not seen enough? Is she suggesting that I have not done enough, worked hard enough, that I don't deserve it because I'm not good enough, worthy enough? Or that I don't actually have a choice in the matter, and therefore I do not actually matter. My needs don't matter, and I will be left to dust and forgotten because basic human decency is not part of the reality we live in. That I must submit to the system and ultimately betray or abandon myself in some way in order to survive, alone, without any actual help, all observed. I watched and felt all that move through my mind. And then, after a breath or three, um, with all that noise in my head, which used to be the absolute truth, plus a brief somatic spike, I said, yes and no. I have and continue to work my end of things. So, no, I don't expect it to just fall into my lap. However, at the same time, as long as I keep my end of the bargain street work, then yes, I expect the rest, life to meet me where I am. If that is perceived as falling into my lap, then yes. It turns out that internally I was not finished with that topic, regardless of what my put together answer may suggest. It was actually really, really great question to hear because it helped me to clarify where I actually was, not where I thought I was, or rather where I wanted to be when I truly searched and felt around it. Side quest. This is interesting because I got triggered, and even though I was able to choose an appropriate response and behavior in the moment, that alone was not enough. I also had to look at the trigger itself and feel whatever made it flare up so I could neutralize that specific wire. End of side quest. I am so tired of trying to be strong. I am so tired of being expected to be strong and pretend that everything is peachy while fucking dying inside. Quote, I don't recognize you. You used to be so strong. End quote. Allow me to acknowledge my full awareness that the next person credited with this comment has no ability to perceive how, due to my complex PTSD, I am receiving and interpreting this message. To make matters worse for than me, they may be thinking that may actually be a helpful statement in some ways, encouragement, if you will. Or maybe, most likely, there was actually no thought given of what that statement may do to me. Ultimately, though, the problem actually is that I am trying to decipher their intentions so I can invalidate my reality, so I can prove to myself that what I'm feeling is simply not justified. And that I am crazy, unreasonable, and projecting my own unresolved issues onto this innocent person who just means well. I don't want to be strong, or more precisely, I don't want strength to be the condition for receiving care. I don't want to have to figure it out. I don't want to have to survive. I don't want to have to suffer just to survive. I don't want to have to compromise myself. I don't want to have to self abandon and self sacrifice. I don't want to pretend that I don't have needs or that they are not important or that they don't matter. I know where I stand now. I am no longer facing backwards. I know my nervous system to the very last nerve. I know the traps my mind sets up for me. I know the old operating system like the back of my hand. And I have clean, clear, and solid connection to my GPS. I know the new baseline I am operating from. It does not involve catering to or compensating for other people's belief systems, insecurities, inadequacies, trauma, or anything else. I meet and I want to be met. I want to be met with softness and openness. I want to be met with transparency and authenticity. I want to be met clean with whatever shows up in any given moment. I collect data, I analyze, process, and I let the body and the nervous system point. Does the body move? Yes or no? Is there a pull? Yes or no? How does it feel? This way, that way. Alive, breathing, here. There is no need to prove my worth anymore. No need to chase. No need to have to be strong. No more bracing. I do not owe suffering in order to exist. Life will unfold as it does, one day at a time, one breath at a time. Link to a Spotify playlist titled 61326 There Will Be Time.